I was sued for $20,000 after exposing my cousin's golden child. Then her own husband sent me a secret text that instantly turned the lawsuit into a divorce. Nana's prized garden was an absolute graveyard of shattered terracotta by the time I finally stepped outside. Tomato stakes were snapped in half, jagged wood protruding from the soil. The bright yellow marigolds had been violently flattened into the damp dirt. My 7-year-old son Leo stood completely frozen at the edge of the concrete patio. A flimsy paper plate holding an untouched slice of Thanksgiving turkey was still perfectly balanced in his small, trembling hands. My older cousin, Chloe, was already screaming his name. "Leo James Miller, you get over here right this second!" I set my iced tea down on the porch railing. My fingertips went ice cold before my brain could even process the scene in front of me. "He didn't do anything," I said, my voice tight. "He's been standing right beside me this entire time." Chloe didn't even acknowledge I had spoken. She marched forward, grabbed Leo by both of his fragile shoulders, and spun him toward the wrecked flower bed, like a prosecutor presenting the murder weapon to a jury. "Look what you did! Look at Nana's garden!" Leo's bottom lip started to quiver. He hadn't moved from that exact spot on the patio in 15 minutes. I knew it as a fact. 3 other full-grown adults on that patio had watched him standing there, plate in hand, quietly watching Chloe's 8-year-old son Mason chase a terrified garden lizard through the tomato stakes with a heavy wooden stick. "He was inside," Mason blurted out quickly, not even looking up from his expensive sneakers. "He told me to do it." Chloe's face did something I had seen 100 times by that point in my life. It was a kind of righteous, theatrical collapse, as if the mere accusation physically pained her to verbalize. "Leo, you apologize to your great-grandmother right now." My son looked at me, not at her, but at me. His wide, terrified eyes were begging me to fix it. "Chloe," I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level because years of family dynamics had taught me that raising my volume even a decibel only made me look unstable in front of our relatives. He was standing right here with a full plate of food. He physically could not have touched that garden. "Oh, so now you're calling Mason a liar?" she snapped, loud enough for the entire house to hear. Manna came shuffling out onto the back porch, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was already glaring at Leo as if he had just confirmed a dark suspicion she'd been harboring all year. "Leo, sweetheart, is this true? Did you ruin my flowers?" My 7-year-old son burst into tears, sobbing into his paper plate right there in front of 16 relatives at his own family's Thanksgiving dinner for a mess he never even touched. That was the exact day I decided I was entirely done being the reasonable, accommodating cousin. Leo was 7. He had been born in April, 6 years after I married his father. By the time this garden incident happened, I had been navigating a messy divorce for 2 of those years, raising Leo entirely on my own in a small rented townhouse in Evanston, Illinois, about 20 minutes away from where the rest of the extended family still gathered for every single holiday at Nana's sprawling house on Maplewood Drive. My cousin Chloe was 35, 5 years older than me. She had meticulously built her entire identity and self-worth around being the responsible one in our chaotic family. She was the one with the rock-solid marriage, the one with the gifted son who played elite travel baseball and made the honor roll, the one everyone called when they needed advice about anything from mortgage rates to marriage counseling. Her son Mason was 8, just over a year older than Leo. And from the time the 2 boys were toddlers, there had been a dark, undeniable current running underneath their interactions that I had been too afraid to name out loud. Mason broke things. Mason took things that did not belong to him. Mason lied smoothly, making aggressive eye contact without a single hesitation, the way some kids do when they figured out that a confident, aggressive lie usually beats a nervous, stuttering truth. And every single time something went wrong, Chloe found a spectacular mental gymnastic routine to make it Leo's fault. It started small enough that I genuinely convinced myself I was just being a paranoid, overprotective mother. When the boys were 5 and 6, Mason knocked a heavy glass bowl of Aunt Susan's potpourri off an expensive mahogany end table. Chloe immediately announced that Leo had been roughhousing near it, even though the boys were literally in separate rooms on different floors of the house at the time. I let it go. It was a bowl of dried flowers. It wasn't worth causing a massive scene at a family gathering. Then, the summer Leo turned 6, Mason completely shattered a priceless ceramic vase Nana kept on her fireplace mantel, a family heirloom that had belonged to her own mother. He did it by throwing a hard baseball at it inside the living room. I was in the backyard with Leo at that exact moment, both of us up to our knees in a plastic kiddie pool. Full, unobstructed view of my Uncle Robert, who was grilling burgers 10 feet away. Chloe confidently told the packed living room that Leo had knocked it over, when I calmly pointed out that Leo hadn't been inside the house in over an hour and was dripping wet. She hit me with a calm, condescending smile and said, "Well, maybe you just haven't been watching him as closely as you thought you were." I cornered her privately in the kitchen later that afternoon. I said, "Chloe, he was outside with me. You know that. Why would you say that?" She looked at me with an expression I would come to deeply despise, her signature move, a kind of wounded, patronizing patience, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "I just think it's very interesting how defensive you get whenever Mason simply brings something up." That was her brilliant, toxic pattern. She wasn't just blaming Leo, she was expertly reframing any logical pushback from me as evidence of my own maternal guilt, denial, or instability. If I fiercely defended my son, I was being defensive. If I stayed perfectly calm, I was hiding something. If I got visibly upset, I was proving to the family that I couldn't handle constructive criticism about my parenting. I remember driving home that humid summer night, turning the whole maddening exchange over and over in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment a normal conversation with my cousin had morphed into a psychological battlefield. I couldn't find an answer, because it had happened so gradually that I had adjusted to each new, crueler version of her without ever noticing the sum of it. The incident that absolutely should have opened my eyes happened at my cousin Maya's engagement party, 8 months before that Thanksgiving. Mason sneakily ate an entire platter of expensive chocolate-covered strawberries that had been set aside for the dessert table, and he ended up making himself violently sick in the upstairs guest bathroom. Leo is severely, deathly allergic to chocolate. He carries an EpiPen. He couldn't have eaten a single bite of one of those strawberries without breaking out in hives and struggling to breathe within 3 minutes. This was a medical fact the entire family had known since he was a toddler. Yet, Chloe still looked my Aunt Susan dead in the eye and said that Leo had ruthlessly dared Mason to eat them all in a competitive eating contest. And Aunt Susan believed her. Nobody in that house stopped to apply basic logic. Nobody asked how a 6-year-old with a life-threatening chocolate allergy would dare another kid to eat chocolate, or why Leo would have been anywhere near a dessert table stocked with a substance that could put him in the pediatric intensive care unit. I didn't fight that one very hard either. I was just so deeply tired. I was a single mom working 50 hours a week. I told myself these were petty, silly disputes over vases and strawberries, not worth detonating a lifelong family relationship over. What I completely failed to understand back then was that Chloe wasn't just reacting to isolated behavioral incidents. She was actively constructing a narrative. She was building a reality, one small, fabricated story at a time. And every single story had the exact same architecture. Mason makes a destructive mess. Leo gets blamed. The family nods along blindly because Chloe delivers the lie with such total, unwavering confidence that doubting her feels as absurd as doubting gravity. The sickest part was that Chloe and I hadn't always been enemies. Growing up, she was the closest thing I had to an older sister. I was an only child until my parents adopted my sister Clara when I was 9. Chloe used to drive me to my SAT prep classes the summer I turned 16 because my mother worked exhausting night shifts at a hospital in Naperville and couldn't take me herself. Chloe stood beside me at my wedding at 26, wearing a sage green bridesmaid dress that she still kept framed in her hallway. When I called her from a sterile hospital waiting room the night Leo was born, 3 weeks premature and terrified of an emergency C-section, she drove 45 minutes at midnight and sat gripping my hand through 14 hours of agonizing labor while my ex-husband was stuck on a delayed flight in Denver. I had never forgotten that night. A huge part of me had spent the next 7 years of her cruelty toward my son entirely unwilling to believe that the woman who wiped my tears in that delivery room was capable of what I was watching her do now. Admitting what Chloe had become meant admitting that the person I trusted most outside my own home was a monster. But the garden incident at Thanksgiving shattered that delusion permanently. Maybe it was watching my sweet boy cry into a cheap paper plate in front of the people who were supposed to love him most. Maybe it was Nana's face when she looked at him with such cold disappointment. Whatever it was, I drove home that night with Leo asleep in his booster seat, and somewhere on Interstate 90, the scared, accommodating version of me died. I stopped being someone who let things go. I didn't scream at Chloe that week. I didn't send a furious text. I didn't post a vague, passive-aggressive rant on Facebook. I didn't even mention my plan to my sister Clara right away. Instead, I drove to a specialized electronics store and bought 2 small, high-definition, wireless hidden cameras. They were designed to look exactly like standard smoke detectors and power banks. I started bringing one with me to every single family gathering, tucked seamlessly into a bulky diaper bag I still carried purely out of habit, even though Leo hadn't touched a diaper in 4 years. Update 1. The very first family gathering after Thanksgiving was Nana's birthday dinner in late January. It was a small, intimate dinner at her house with maybe 10 people. I casually set the power bank camera on a bookshelf in the den, angled perfectly toward the coffee table, where the kids always played video games. Nothing explosive happened that night. Mason knocked over a full cup of sticky grape juice onto the rug and immediately blamed it on the dog that didn't exist anymore. Nana's golden retriever had passed away 2 years prior. Nobody but me seemed to notice the absolute psychotic strangeness of that lie. I kept the footage anyway, saving it to a secure external hard drive. I was learning his rhythm. He lied fast, aggressively, and without a microsecond of hesitation. It was the muscle memory of a child who had never once paid a consequence for deception. In February, at Uncle Robert's loud Super Bowl party, I caught something infinitely more useful. Mason wandered into the guest bedroom and went through 3 separate purses left on the bed, including Aunt Susan's designer tote. He pocketed a folded $50 bill from her wallet. He didn't know the smoke detector camera was sitting right there, tucked innocently between 2 decorative shams. The footage was crystal clear. He counted the cash, scanned the empty room, and slid it deep into his sock. Later that night, Aunt Susan spent 30 frantic minutes turning her purse inside out, insisting she must have miscounted her ATM withdrawal before her hair appointment. I sat on the couch, sipping my drink, and said absolutely nothing. I went home, uploaded the file, and locked the hard drive in a fireproof filing cabinet in my bedroom closet, right next to Leo's baby books. In March, Chloe hosted Easter Sunday at her own house. It was a massive, pristine colonial in a wealthy subdivision, the kind of house with a sweeping 2-story foyer and a crystal chandelier she never missed an opportunity to mention. During the afternoon, Mason broke a heavy brass lamp in the formal living room while violently wrestling a cousin's massive dog that had been let inside, directly violating Chloe's strict no pets past the foyer rule. When the crash echoed through the house, Chloe came running. Mason instantly pointed a finger and told his mother that Leo had let the dog in and knocked the lamp over. Leo had been sitting at the kitchen island with me the entire time, slowly eating a slice of glazed ham in full, undeniable view of 4 other adults. This time, I didn't stay quiet. I looked her in the eye and said evenly, "Chloe, Leo has been sitting right next to me for 45 minutes. She didn't yell. Yelling wasn't her brand. Instead, she deployed that soft, profoundly aggrieved look, the one designed to make every other adult in the room feel intensely protective of her. I just find it so interesting," she sighed heavily, "that every single time something happens, you have a watertight alibi, ready to go." She said the word alibi as if I were a mob lawyer defending a known felon, instead of a mother stating the physical location of her 7-year-old child. "4 other adults physically saw him at this table, Chloe," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "This isn't an alibi. It's the concept of object permanence." "You always do this," Chloe whispered, her voice dropping into something quieter, far more wounded, and ruthlessly effective in a room full of relatives who desperately wanted to believe she was a saint. "You turn every little accident into a massive production." "Mason made an honest mistake letting a dog in. Can we please not turn my living room into a courtroom?" A courtroom. The word landed like a physical blow, considering what I would eventually call this whole ordeal in my own mind. She had used the word before I even thought to use it myself, as though some dark, subconscious part of her already knew exactly what these family gatherings had become for my son, and she had gleefully appointed herself the judge and executioner. I let the argument die that day. Uncle Robert's wife touched my arm gently and suggested, "We serve the pie," the universal family signal for burying a conflict before it ruined the aesthetic of the holiday. But I went home and saved the footage of Mason wrestling the dog alone. There was a smaller, seemingly insignificant incident that spring that told me more about Chloe's true psychology than any of the dramatic explosions. We were at a casual birthday party for a neighbor's kid. It was a mix of 3 different families, mostly strangers to us. Mason got into a vicious argument with a boy he didn't know over a video game controller, and he shoved the kid hard enough to knock him backward into a heavy bookshelf. The boy's mother, a woman none of us knew, saw the entire physical altercation happen with her own eyes. Chloe didn't hesitate. She rushed over, apologized profusely and calmly to the mother, took absolute full responsibility, and marched Mason to a chair to sit in timeout for the remainder of the party. There was no blaming, no deflection, no bizarre conspiracy theories, and absolutely no mention of Leo, because Leo wasn't even at this party. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time after I got home, staring at my steering wheel. It wasn't that Chloe was delusional or incapable of holding her son accountable. She had just executed perfect textbook parenting, cleanly, in front of a total stranger. The chilling difference was that a stranger's judgment didn't threaten her core identity the way our family's judgment did. In front of random people who had no stake in the mythology of her perfection, she could afford to just be a normal mother, handling a normal, misbehaving kid. It was only inside our family ecosystem, where her rigid image as the ultimate matriarch, the successful one, the golden child was at stake, that the truth became a flexible, negotiable concept. This wasn't blind motherly love. It was a cold, calculated strategy. She knew exactly what she was doing. She simply reserved her psychological warfare for an audience that mattered to her ego. She was maintaining a fictional universe where her son was fundamentally superior, and mine was fundamentally broken. I planted my first active trap in April. At a cousin's baby shower, I casually mentioned to Aunt Susan that a $50 bill had mysteriously vanished from my wallet during the last family get-together, and I wondered aloud if maybe one of the kids was developing sticky fingers. I didn't name Mason. I didn't have to. Chloe cornered me in the kitchen 20 minutes later, her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. "Are you seriously implying that Mason is stealing from you?" "I didn't say his name, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "You didn't have to. Everyone knows exactly what you meant." Her voice cracked perfectly on cue. "I cannot believe, after everything I've done for you, that you would accuse my child of being a criminal." I stood back and allowed her to aggressively search Leo's small Batman backpack, right there in Aunt Susan's kitchen, in front of 3 other female relatives. I let her do it because I already knew exactly what she would find. Absolutely nothing. The frantic, unhinged nature of her search did exactly what I needed it to do. It planted a heavy, undeniable seed. A few of the women exchanged a loaded glance I had never seen before. A tiny flicker of doubt, aimed, for the very first time, in Chloe's direction instead of mine. She didn't apologize when she found the backpack empty. She just zipped it up and stormed out. By June, my external hard drive was a gold mine. I had Mason breaking a patio umbrella and blaming a gust of wind that didn't exist. I had Mason telling a 5-year-old cousin that Santa was dead and then pointing at Leo when the kid started sobbing. And I had the Holy Grail, a clip from a playground in late June where Mason, standing near a stroller where I had tucked a camera, flat out told another child, "Next time, I'll just say Leo did it. Nobody checks anyway." That sentence turned my stomach into knots, but I knew it was the nail in the coffin I was waiting for. In July, at Nana's massive 4th of July barbecue, the stakes skyrocketed. Mason found a box of fireworks in the garage. Despite being warned repeatedly by 3 different adults not to touch them, he lit a heavy-duty bottle rocket on the concrete driveway. It tipped over, shot sideways, directly into the open garage, scorched a massive, charred black streak up the side of Uncle Robert's prized fishing boat, and ignited a stack of cardboard recycling. Uncle Robert grabbed a garden hose and doused the flames in seconds. The physical damage was mostly cosmetic, but it was close enough to a real disaster that half the party came sprinting. Chloe beat me to the garage. By the time I jogged up the driveway, she had already assembled her bulletproof narrative. She was looking Uncle Robert in the eye, her hand on her chest, saying, "I am so sorry, Robert. I saw Leo hovering right near the fireworks box right before the spark went off." It was a masterclass in manipulative linguistics. She used the words near and right before, so she could later backpedal and claim she never technically said she saw him light the fuse. But this time, the universe was on my side. Leo was inside the house at that exact, literal second, sitting at the kitchen table with Nana, diligently cutting red and blue star shapes out of construction paper. Nana herself shot the lie down instantly, without a second of hesitation, because she had been sitting 2 feet across from him the whole time. I stood in the driveway and watched the panic flash behind Chloe's eyes as she was forced to recalibrate in real time. She immediately backpedaled into a vaguer, more desperate insinuation. Well, I saw a boy in a blue shirt running away. I just assumed. I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to. I just quietly went home and downloaded the porch camera footage, which clearly showed Mason gleefully reaching into the fireworks box, lighting the fuse, and sprinting away, alone. My file was now completely undeniable. Whatever came next was going to be an extinction-level event for her reputation. The final strike arrived in September, at our cousin Maya's extravagant wedding. Maya had asked Chloe to be her matron of honor. For 8 months, Chloe had treated this wedding like her personal royal coronation. She controlled every detail, bragging endlessly about the luxurious venue in Naperville, the string quartet, and especially the $4,500 custom-designed 3-tiered cake from a boutique downtown bakery that Maya's wealthy new mother-in-law had specifically demanded. Chloe thrived at the center of an event like this. I came armed. I brought both of my hidden cameras. I clipped one inside my purse, angled flawlessly toward the main entrance of the reception hall. For the second angle, I approached the professional wedding videographer, a sweet woman named Elena I had befriended at the bridal shower. During the busy cocktail hour, I quietly asked Elena if I could borrow her backup camera on a tripod for 20 minutes, claiming I wanted to capture a candid, stationary angle of the kids playing for a family scrapbook. She smiled, said absolutely, set it up on a side table directly facing the cake display, and walked away to change lenses. During the 20-minute window, when the entire bridal party and all the adults stepped outside onto the golf course for formal sunset photos, I knelt down and gave Mason a secret mission. I looked him in the eyes and whispered, "Mason, it is your very special job to guard this beautiful cake while the grown-ups are outside. It's a super important task, and only a really responsible big kid can do it." He puffed his chest out with intense pride. I walked out the doors to join the photos. I already knew, from 11 months of intensive behavioral study, exactly what would happen the second he was left completely unsupervised in a room with something fragile, expensive, and forbidden. He didn't just touch the frosting. According to the flawless 4K footage I reviewed later, he dragged a heavy wooden banquet chair over, climbed onto it to poke the delicate sugar flowers on the top tier, completely lost his footing, grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, and brought the entire $4,500 3-tiered masterpiece crashing down onto the hardwood floor. It was a catastrophic collapse. Buttercream, expensive fondant, and shattered sponge cake covered a 10-foot radius. Mason sat frozen in the absolute wreckage for a full 60 seconds, frosting smeared up to his elbows, before he started wailing. The bridal party walked back through the double doors to a scene of total devastation. Chloe's scream echoed off the vaulted ceilings, silencing the entire hall. "Leo, what did you do?" Leo was standing 40 feet away from the cake, holding my hand. He was wearing a tiny rented tuxedo, standing directly in the middle of the family photo line, entirely captured on at least a dozen different smartphones that were snapping pictures of the bridal party at that exact moment. Mason was sitting in the epicenter of a destroyed $4,500 cake, his rented dress shirt completely coated in vanilla buttercream. Maya, the bride, rounded the corner in her stunning white gown and froze. She stared at the apocalyptic mess, and then stared at Chloe's son sitting in it. And Chloe, completely bypassing the physical reality of the universe without missing a single beat, yelled it again, louder, so the 50-plus guests filtering into the room could hear her. Leo must have done this. He must have dared Mason to climb up there. That was it. The timer hit 0. I was done waiting. I calmly walked over to the side table, picked up Elena's heavy video camera, unhooked it from the tripod, and turned the digital playback screen toward the crowd. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just pressed play. Right there, in front of 50 stunned wedding guests, I let the last 20 minutes testify. The high-definition screen showed Mason dragging the chair, Mason climbing, Mason reaching for the top tier, Mason, entirely alone in an empty room with no one within 50 feet of him, destroying the cake by himself. The reception hall went dead silent in a way that raised the hairs on my arms. Maya's new mother-in-law, the woman who paid for the cake, pressed both hands over her mouth in sheer horror. Maya turned slowly to look at Chloe. The expression on the bride's face wasn't just anger. It was the chilling, nauseating realization that someone you trusted deeply had been lying to your face for years. "Chloe," Maya whispered, her voice trembling, "you just screamed at a 7-year-old boy who was standing 40 feet away. On my wedding day. While your own son is sitting in the cake." Chloe's face rapidly cycled through a terrifying spectrum of emotions: confusion, deep denial, and finally, sheer panic. That footage doesn't show the whole room. Leo could have been hiding. There is nobody else in the room, Chloe, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent hall. It's just Mason. It has only ever been Mason. The whole time. But I didn't stop there. I had promised myself months ago that if I ever pulled the pin on this grenade, I wouldn't leave a single piece of shrapnel behind. I pulled my portable mini projector out of my oversized bag, the one I had brought under the guise of playing a slideshow later. I connected it to my phone, pointed the lens at a massive blank white section of the venue wall near the gift table, and asked Maya quietly if I could have exactly 5 minutes before the dinner service started. Maya, tears in her eyes, nodded without a second thought. 11 months of hidden footage began playing on a 10-foot loop across the wall. Chloe stood, completely paralyzed by the ruined cake, her matron of honor dress stained, mascara bleeding down her cheeks under the warm string lights. The wall showed Mason pocketing the $50 bill from Aunt Susan's purse. It showed Mason shattering the Easter lamp. It showed Mason lighting the bottle rocket that scorched Uncle Robert's boat. And worst of all, it showed Mason at the playground, looking dead into the lens and saying, "Next time, I'll just say Leo did it. Nobody checks anyway." And edited under almost every single video clip was the crystal clear audio of Chloe's calm, authoritative voice, publicly blaming my son for every single disaster. The exact same practiced, wounded tone she used every time to manipulate the family. Someone near the open bar gasped out loud when the fireworks clip played. Uncle Robert physically turned his body to look at his niece, his face contorted in a mix of profound betrayal and disgust. 50 guests stood in near total silence. Waiters froze with trays of champagne in their hands. They watched 11 months of a little boy's psychological torture get corrected in real time on a rented banquet wall. When the video finally faded to black, nobody spoke. Nana was the first to break the silence. Over the past year, she had forced my son to handwrite 2 separate, humiliating apology letters to Chloe for things I just proved he never did. Her voice, usually warm, was low and shaking with a terrifying rage. "Chloe, how long has this been happening?" Chloe's invincible composure finally shattered. You're twisting this. Mason is a good boy. Kids make mistakes. I was just trying to protect him." "You made a 7-year-old boy sob into a paper plate at Thanksgiving," I said, my voice cutting through the room like glass. "For a garden he never touched. You let my son believe he was a monster." Nobody rushed to defend her. Not Aunt Susan, who had eagerly searched Leo's backpack. Not Nana. Not Uncle Robert. Not even Chloe's husband, Mark, who was staring at the wall with an expression that told me this was the absolute first time. He was seeing this reality too. Nana pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "You will apologize to Leo. Right now." It wasn't a real apology. It was a stiff, humiliated, choked-out sequence of words delivered through gritted teeth to a 7-year-old in a tuxedo who didn't fully comprehend the magnitude of the moment, other than the fact that his mother was holding him tight, and for the first time in his life, the family was looking at him without accusation. Nana then loudly announced that Chloe owed Aunt Susan $50 and that she and Maya's new in-laws would be having a very serious discussion about who was writing a $4,500 check for the ruined cake. The DJ awkwardly started a slow song to try and pull the room back from the brink, but the damage was permanent. People drifted like ghosts. Over the next hour, multiple relatives approached me with tears in their eyes, offering hushed, horrified apologies. I just nodded, thanked them, and held Leo close. I thought that was the end. I drove home, feeling a strange, hollow sense of vindication, assuming the truth had won and Chloe would retreat in shame. Update 2. I was entirely wrong about how it would end. 2 days after the wedding, on a quiet Tuesday evening, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was a text from Chloe. I am consulting my lawyer tomorrow. What you did at Maya's wedding was targeted defamation and illegal recording. The emotional damage you caused Mason is severe. You should have thought about the legal consequences before you decided to publicly humiliate a child in front of 50 people. I read the text 3 times. My hands shook so violently, I dropped the phone on the counter. After a year of video evidence, after her own son was caught sitting in the wreckage, after the entire family turned on her. She was making herself the victim again, and this time, she was weaponizing the legal system. I called my sister Clara immediately. She drove over in record time, made me a cup of chamomile tea, and we sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m., mapping out a timeline of every video, every date, every witness. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, Clara kept repeating, trying to keep me from spiraling. You didn't slander her. You played a documentary. The next morning, I hired an attorney named Julian. I handed over the hard drive, the timeline, and the threatening text. Julian was confident. Legally, she has zero ground to stand on, he assured me. But she can still file a frivolous suit to bleed you dry. If she proceeds, you're looking at a $10,000 retainer just to fight the initial motions. $10,000. That was the entirety of my savings. The money I had spent 3 years scraping together for a down payment on a small house for Leo. The sheer injustice of it made me physically nauseous. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived. A formal demand from a slick Marietta law firm. A public, written apology to the family, and $20,000 to cover Mason's necessary therapeutic psychiatric intervention resulting from severe public humiliation. If I didn't pay within 10 days, they would officially file the lawsuit. I was sitting at the table, staring at the $20,000 demand, crying silent tears of sheer exhaustion when my phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. I opened the message. It was a massive block of text, accompanied by 3 PDF attachments. It was from Chloe's husband, Mark. He had never texted me privately in the 15 years I had known him. I am so sorry. I found the legal demand she sent you. I also found the therapy invoices she plans to use as evidence of Mason's trauma from the wedding. You need to see the dates. I opened the first PDF. It was a billing statement from a pediatric behavioral psychologist. Mason had been attending intense therapy sessions twice a week, but the dates didn't start after the wedding. They started in January, 8 full months before the wedding ever happened. Mark's text continued. Mason's school flagged him for severe behavioral issues in December: lying, minor theft, aggression. I've been paying for this therapy out of a private account because Chloe refused to accept there was a problem. In our sessions, Chloe actively told the doctor that Mason's issues were just him acting out because he was being unfairly compared to your son. I've been making excuses for her for years. But I watched your video from the wedding, and I realized she isn't in denial. She's sick. Look at the last screenshot. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the final image. It was a screenshot of a text message thread between Chloe and her best friend, dated 4 days before the Thanksgiving garden incident. Chloe had written, I am so sick of the family thinking Leo is this perfect little angel while Mason struggles. I need to find a way to even the playing field before people start asking questions about my parenting. Even the playing field. I stopped breathing. The date on that text changed the entire reality of the last year. Chloe hadn't just panicked and lied to protect her son in the moment. This was premeditated. She had stated, in writing, her explicit intent to manufacture a narrative that destroyed my 7-year-old's reputation, just to camouflage her own son's clinical behavioral issues and protect her flawless matriarch image. I forwarded everything to Julian within 30 seconds. Julian called me 10 minutes later, laughing in sheer disbelief. This isn't just a defense anymore, he said. This is absolute devastation. She's attempting to sue you for damages that predate the alleged incident, and we have her written intent to maliciously scapegoat your child to commit fraud. I'm sending a response today." Julian drafted a brutal, surgical counter letter. He included the therapy dates, the even the playing field text, and informed her counsel that if they proceeded, we would publicly enter all of it into the court record, countersue for malicious prosecution, and seek legal fees. Chloe's lawyer formally withdrew from the case less than 48 hours later. The lawsuit evaporated into thin air, but the fallout within the family was nuclear. Mark didn't just send the evidence to me. He sent the therapy dates and the premeditated text to Nana, Aunt Susan, and Uncle Robert. 2 weeks later, the family had a gathering at Aunt Susan's house. I walked in without Leo, prepared for a war. Chloe was sitting on the couch, looking pale, isolated, and completely stripped of her usual arrogant armor. I stood in the center of the room and looked down at her. "For over a year, you used my little boy to hide the fact that your own son needed serious medical help. You chose a 7-year-old as a scapegoat because it was easier than sitting with the fact that your life wasn't picture perfect." For the first time in her life, Chloe didn't have a slick, wounded reply. She just looked at her lap, her hands trembling. Aunt Susan spoke up from the corner, her voice thick with guilt. "I owe you a massive apology. I searched Leo's backpack because she told me to. I should have trusted you. I am so sorry." Mark filed for legal separation 4 months later. The divorce proceedings have been ugly. Mark got primary custody, and Mason is still in heavy therapy, this time without a mother in the room actively sabotaging his progress by blaming the world. It cost me $2,500 in non-refundable lawyer retainer fees to get through the nightmare, pushing my house savings back another year. But eventually, I bought that little house in Evanston. Leo has his own bedroom now, painted a bright, vibrant blue that he picked out himself. He is 8 years old now. His confidence has returned. He laughs louder, he plays harder, and when he accidentally spills a glass of water or drops a toy, he doesn't flinch or look around the room in sheer terror, waiting to be screamed at. He just grabs a towel and cleans it up. I still think about that Thanksgiving sometimes. I think about how long I let the abuse happen because I was too afraid of disrupting the family peace. But I also know that reputations, built on lies and the silence of others, are the most fragile structures in the world. All it took to burn Chloe's empire to the ground was a hidden camera, a blank wall, and a mother who finally decided she had nothing left to lose.